You received a word about a time frame that's like matches the time frame of Joseph. 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine, during which time we need to build our Goshen. Now, when I heard you preach that message, I about came out of my skin, because I've literally been working on building a physical Goshen, not even just a spiritual Goshen, but one in the natural, a physical Goshen here as part of our move from Arizona to Florida, and Dog the Bounty Hunter and his wife Francie coming with us. That's what we're in the process of doing, is building a Goshen, because I also have been getting words about a upcoming and impending famine in the world, not just the land, but in the world. But I didn't know the timing. Tell us what God has been telling you about that, and let's unpack it.
Well, the prophetic word started actually with a message that came to me in 2020. The Lord said, tell them you have 9 years left. And that 9 years left began from 2021. And now we're in the 7th year of that 9-year period between 2023 and 2030. And I believe that after 2030, the world is going to change dramatically. And I'm not just talking about the famine that is synonymous with agrarian culture, food, farming, water, all of those things. I'm talking about a famine of credit, a famine of banking, a famine of heating, lighting, electricity. And the Lord spoke to me that what is considered money is going to go through another revolution. We've had those revolutions throughout history, so nothing's new under the sun. You know, we have the Bretton Woods Treaty, where you all in America took the dollar off the gold standard, changing what money meant forever. And now money means dollars around the world. I believe we're shifting into 2030 into another season of what does money look like. And around the world, that's going to be different for different places. You know, I don't just believe that we're called to build Goshen. I believe certain political figures and government leaders are going to build Goshen as well.
Okay.
I believe there are going to be nations that are going to talk about backing their currency by gold and silver as a way of transferring wealth back to their nations.
Yeah.
I believe we're going to see nations that were considered fallen nations rise, and nations that are now considered risen nations fall. And then there's going to be complexity in between that, because in that complexity, like for instance for America, I believe we're going to see states rise and states fall. So it's not going to just be a global picture or a continental picture. Even within that continent, it's not going to be as simple as just that nation has fallen. It's going to be which states within that nation are actually rising up during that time as well. And so just like in Joseph's day and in the day of Moses, there is a move to build the Goshen. And what does Goshen look like? Goshen looks like either governments partnering with prophets, pharaohs, or who don't know the Lord, partnering with those specific people that God has raised in the earth. And I do believe there's going to be a shift of prophets moving into those spaces strategically, leadership positions in the earth that are going to give nations strategies to be Goshen states, Goshen countries, Goshen regions, all of those things. But then there's the other one where I believe God's going to entrust people to build their own Goshens personally as well. And that looks like even the woman who was a widow, her and her son were about to be taken by the creditors. And the prophet said, what do you have in your house? And that was a Goshen for a period of famine within the nation, and her were going to live happily on the rest of it. And so there's going to be supernatural supply, there's going to be all sorts.
The individual thing, wow, this is such a spectrum that is so awesome for everybody watching, because you see, even with the woman that had the multiplication of the oil that Tomi was just talking about, she was an individual that God individually provided for during a deep time of famine. So you could be an individual and you don't have a governmental level of authority or anointing or influence, and God still can create a Goshen for you within your home. But then, as you said, there's also the governmental level of that happening for states and things like that. That should give a lot of encouragement to people that if they can't go and buy land or, build an agricultural Goshen with their own wells or fields or water, that they can individually expect and put their faith on God creating a Goshen for them right in their apartment or their little home,
Yes, absolutely. And the thing is, not everybody's going to build a Goshen, but to those who hear particularly this kind of message, there can be a feeling of incompetence or a feeling of I'm not proficient in understanding the markets or how they work. I think in this next 7 years, we're going to go back to the parable of the wise virgins and the foolish virgins. Mm-hmm. And the hallmark of the foolish is that they are going to stay with foolish people. Mm. And the hallmark of the wise is that they are going to stay with wise people. And so actually, my strongest prophetic guidance to your audience during this time, Katie, is that they begin to deliberately choose friends instead of making them. Mm. And in choosing them, there is a divine strategy. Ruth was not considered intelligent or educated. She was a Moabite. She was cut off. She was ostracized. Her community were just completely taken out of the community of Israel. But in the midst of that, she understood that if I can associate my life with somebody wise, she was in a nexus between a very wise woman and a very foolish one. Orpah is a very significant prophetic word for the next 7 years because Orpah means stubborn. It's like when it says God wanted to take the children of Israel out of Egypt, but then the people complained and grumbled because they were Orpah, which means stiff-necked. Mm. And so there is an Orpah friendship that we all have. We all have those friends that don't want to change. They talk about change, but they don't want change.
And they never do.
They even give all, and they never do. And they even give all the symptoms of wanting life to get better, but they always live in someday and one day. They never actually progress beyond emotion to actual motion. And that's what Orpah did. She kissed Ruth. She kissed Naomi. They both said, we'll go with you, which is interesting. They both kissed and they both wept, but Orpah returned. Her emotion didn't actually lead to motion. And so don't be deceived by people who show the same feelings about something as you. Mm. It's really about the people who have the actions to follow through as well.
Wow.
And the operative word is Ruth clave to Naomi. The only other time that word is used is in marriage. So wow. Ruth literally committed her life till death do her part to eternal friendships. And I believe there are seasonal friends, but in these next 7 years, God actually wants us to connect us with lifetime friends. He wants to connect us with people who, where they die, will die, where they live, will live, and there will be buried. There's something happening now that we're no longer having scaffolding company and scaffolding staff. God is actually connecting us with people who are there for the long haul. And so I always say this, you have to be ruthless to be Ruth. Because Orpah, you grew up with her, you went to the same school together, you did each other's hair, you dated the same boyfriends, married the same people, read the same magazines. But when it's time for change, Orpah has to go.